Today we're talking about shallow crankbaits and how to maximize the effectiveness of the hunting capability of this unique lure to help you catch more bass. So to do that, we're going to talk about areas of the lake that you may not have previously considered. We're going to talk about gear to use to make sure that you can get the fish out. And we'll talk about some unique retrieval methods that will help enhance the effectiveness of that searching capability of this bait. Most people, when you're using a square bill crankbait or a shallow diving crankbait, you're throwing at woods, hard shorelines, you're trying to bounce it and deflect it off of hard things, and that can elicit strikes, and that's a great way to use it, and it's a pretty safe way to use it. You can get it hung up sometimes, but not most of the time. You're clean and clear. So that's when people tend to throw it. So I'm going to suggest throwing it in a situation where you have an expansive weed flat. You've got a lot of thick weeds that are covering. Let's say you're in 5 feet of water and the bottom 3 feet are choked out with weeds and you've got 2 feet clear to the surface. That's a great place where I'm going to look to throw a square bill crankbait and get a super erratic action out of it to try to catch big bass. So the gear I'm going to use, of course, is a crankbait rod. Everybody's talking about it. This one here I've got is a 7-foot medium power Kraken crankbait rod. It's specifically designed for crankbait, and what the design specifically for is a much softer tip, right? To be able to take the load, to take the surging. Whenever you've got a hard bait with treble hooks in it, you want the surge protection that the softer tip gives you, and so get a crankbait specific rod if you can. If you can't, get a medium powered rod or a medium light powered rod with a medium action tip, something that's a lot softer and more forgiving. I use a 6.5-to-1 6-skill hammer reel. It's a little bit slower, so I'm not powering that thing through. It just kind of slows you down with that gear ratio. I'm using 12-pound braided line from Reaction Tackle, an 8-strand braid, and I'm using a 12-pound fluorocarbon leader. I use a leader. You can, when you're fishing moving baits, you can get away without the leader. You can just fish braid, but where I'm at, we've got toothy critters that also eat in weed beds the same place the bass do. So if I get a northern or a muskie, I need to have some fluorocarbon to help me with abrasion resistance when the toothy critter sucks in this bait completely, so I don't lose the lure. But it's also good, it's an abrasion resistant thing to put a fluorocarbon leader on it. I tie that with that braid DeFluoro with a double uni knot, and I always use a clasp on the business end so that I can change crankbaits quickly to adjust the colors. Colors, bluegill colors. I'm not even going to talk about a particular crankbait because most square bill crankbaits hunt really well, but there are some things you can do to help the hunting better. So retrieval is important. It's not just a cast and retrieve thing, although you can do that and be successful with it. What I've found is that you do need some movement in your rod tip. You need to keep, a lot of the times, the rod tip high because in these situations we're fishing skinny water over weeds. Those fish are buried in the weeds. They're looking for feeding opportunities up, and you need to keep your shallow crankbait in that top 1.5 to 2 feet of water so that you're not hung up in the weeds. But the cadence and the way you move your rod is important. So what I do is I'll make casts out and I'll keep my rod tip in a position, either up or in a position that I can control the depth so that I'm not digging down into those weeds, but rather I'm above them. And then I'm trying to impart and help exacerbate the erratic action of a bait that already has a pretty good hunting action. So I'll find crankbaits, shallow diving crankbaits that hunt well, and then I'll enhance them with the way I'm moving my rod tip. You'll see in this video here, I'm shaking my rod tip in addition to the hunting action of the crankbait. That additional movement of the rod is making that bait work extra erratically through that zone. And I'm telling you, the bass can't stand it. If you run across a bass who's parked in the weeds looking for a meal opportunity and this thing goes by them, they're going to hit it. A lot of anglers are going to use a chatterbait in a situation like this because it's safe and they can reel it through the weeds and they don't have to worry about getting hung up. And it could be good, but you can also miss some fish that would have otherwise hit this crankbait and are immediately hooked up. You'll have to swap the hooks out and get the KVD triple grip Mustad short, strong hooks. They're second to none, and they're important for pulling fish out of the weeds in this particular use of a shallow crankbait. You get a big bass on and he's in 3 feet of weeds and 2 feet of water above it, and he comes up and sucks in your bait and pulls you down into those weeds. You're going to need that KVD triple grip strong hook to keep the fish pinned up when he's buried in the weeds, and you can get over to him and pull him out. So don't be afraid to come behind people who are throwing chatterbaits and spinnerbaits and they're doing their best to power fish and stay out of the weeds, and come in there with a shallow diving crankbait and get real aggressive and get an erratic cadence and action with your rod and reel, and snap yourself free when you get hung up in the weeds if you should get hung up, but really hunt that bait around in the weeds. It's a super effective way to use a crankbait in a situation where most are hiding from trouble, and you can bring a bait in there with open treble hooks and get really good hookups and catch fish in a hurry in the right situation. So there you have it. Update and upgrade your crankbait game by not being afraid of shallow weeds. You'll see the situation. You know what I'm talking about if you bass fish. You got a big flat to deal with, and it's an effective way to get bit. Hope you found these tips helpful. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the water.